Have you ever been in a room at a party or a conference and somebody walked in and all eyes were drawn to that person as if magnetically, and everyone wanted to be around that person, and people actually felt better about themselves when they were around that person? Or conversely, have you ever been in the same room and somebody else walked in and the exact opposite happened? That other person might as well not even have been there, and the room was actually smaller because they were in it. How great would it be to be that first person? And how terrible would it be to be that second person? Hi, I'm Dr. Aaron Anderson, and I teach doctors, business people, and politicians how to be present and build rapport with anyone, anywhere, anytime. I help doctors break bad news to patients about the worst news imaginable. I help healthcare organizations increase patient satisfaction scores and save millions of dollars in the process. I help business people communicate with stakeholders in times of crisis, and I help politicians talk with everyday people in everyday places about everyday things and communicate with others electronically across this new video media that we all find ourselves in. Today, you're going to learn the 3 most important skills that all those people use to do all of those things. And when you walk away, you too will be able to be that first person in the room anytime you want to be. But first, I need to apologize for this beard. You see, it's COVID, and apparently you don't have to shave anymore, or at least that's what my colleagues tell me, and so they have me in a beard growing contest. Of course, my colleagues are all stuntmen. This is what they look like. You see, before I was a professor or a consultant, my first job, my first career was as a professional fight director. What's a fight director, you ask? I'm glad you asked. It's somebody who teaches actors how to sword fight, gunfight, fall downstairs, and catch on fire. Is that a real job, you ask? I'm glad you asked. Yes, it is a real job, and yes, it is as much fun as it sounds. Another thing I get asked a lot is, have you worked with any famous actors? And yes, I've worked with lots of famous actors. Here are some of them. I've also worked with lots of actors you've never heard of. Now, before you let this impress you too much, here's the last movie I did. It was called Eyeborgs, and it was a huge hit on the Sci-Fi Channel in Germany. Okay, so it's not really a great movie, but it is on Netflix now. So if you're a little drunk late at night and you're flipping through the channels, I absolutely recommend you watch this after you've watched all the rest of Netflix. But I warn you, little robots have taken over the world and only one man can save them. So I don't want to ruin that for you. The other question I get asked a lot is, what's the strangest part of your job? And that brings us to the first part of what presence is. You see, the strangest part of my job is that very strange things no longer seem strange. For instance, here's what an average Saturday night looks like in my backyard. In the stunt business, this is what we call a fire whip. Now, we call it a fire whip because it's a whip that you catch on fire. And why crack a normal whip when you can crack one that's on fire? Now, I showed you this because it has to do with our topic, believe it or not, but not perhaps in the way that you're thinking. Let's go back to the tape for a second. Now, the eagle-eyed among you might recognize that at the end of this sequence, my shirt is on fire. Now, this is actually perfectly safe because I was wearing a fire retardant gel. However, I had not communicated that information to my son, who was holding a fire extinguisher, or my wife, who was running the camera. This is how that tape ends.
He's on fire, he's on fire. Turn around.
I need to take a moment here to give a shout out to my long-suffering wife who has to live with me every day. You'll notice in that video, my son was like, "He's on fire, he's on fire." And my wife was like, "Turn around." As I said, this happens a lot at my house. My wife is a saint. Now, the key to this innocent misunderstanding was communication, or my lack thereof. Now, you see, I was the leader of that team. And yet I had not communicated to my key stakeholders, my wife and my son, what my contingency plans were. That lack of communication could have been catastrophic. Communication is also at the core of what presence is. Remember this guy, the Dos Equis guy, the most interesting man in the world? This is what most people think about when they think about presence. They think about someone who is interesting. But you're not most people. You need to know what presence really is. And presence is the opposite of that. Think about the governors you work for, or think about going to the hospital. If you go to the hospital, you don't want a doctor who's interesting. You want one who's interested in you. Two of the members of your organization were brave and kind enough to let me interview them about people they know who had presence. Here's what Pat Cummings had to say about someone she knows. Could you describe an interaction you've had with somebody you thought had presence?
Well, the one that I think is most impressionable to me was one, it was years ago. Maybe I was too young and impressionable. But when I was working actually downtown Minneapolis, and there was a gentleman you'd see like on the lunch hour walking down the street, and he just caught your eye and people were drawn to him, or you'd see him in a restaurant and he would make eye contact with you and he would welcome conversation even though you knew he was somebody. And at the time I didn't really know who he was. It didn't take me long to figure out. It also helped that he was a former Viking football player, but he was also at the time probably a lawyer who then became a Supreme Court justice in Minnesota. But he just had this presence that people were drawn to him. You could see it. And it's not just, famous people draw people, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have presence, I think. This guy had presence because he made you feel important, even though he was kind of taking control.
Right.
Without even trying. I don't know. It's a hard thing to articulate.
That's a great description of it. Can you identify anything particular, any small things particularly that he did that helped with that?
I think it was his interaction with people, and he demonstrated genuine interest in the people around him, in the situation. It didn't seem that it was all about him. It was all about everybody else or whatever it was you were talking about. And this guy went on, of course, to do just phenomenal things, that were all about everybody else and not him.
That's great. Michael Leahy was also brave and kind enough to share a story. Here's what he had to say. What was it about them that gave them presence? Did they do anything in particular or act any particular way?
Yes. And in fact, it is something I've seen in multiple people that I thought had presence. But the example I'll give is I met Governor Hogan more than 10 years before he ran for governor. And he was one of my clients in my law practice, as it turned out. And what always struck me about him was that he listened very thoroughly. It was clear he was giving his attention to whoever he was engaged with and not thinking about what he was going to say next.
Right.
And so when he did speak, it was typically both very authoritatively, but also compelling and empathetic. So if he disagreed with someone, he would repeat back to them what he heard them say, and then explain why he disagreed. And it to me showed, just a considerable interest. And then the second piece of this is when he was challenged, his demeanor didn't change at all. He would just ask, well, what is it you disagree with? So again, he came across as very interested and concerned about the other person, wanted to learn from them, but at the same time, very certain in what it was he was talking about.
That's absolutely wonderful. What a great description. And don't we all wish we could be described that way someday?
You bet.
Now, what's the common thread in both these stories? What things did you hear in both examples? That's right. It was about somebody being interested in other people, having honest curiosity and engaging the other people. A couple of weeks ago, I sent out a survey to all of you asking what difference having an increased amount of presence in your life would make. This is what you had to say. It will help me become more productive and less frustrated, increase support for key initiatives, capture attention long enough for complex ideas to gain a foothold, make those around me more at ease and susceptible to agreement, increase my ability to establish long-lasting relationships and contact with clients. That's a good list. And yes, by the end of the day, you'll be able to do all of those things and more. The next question we asked was, have you ever met someone who had no presence, and what were the things that got in the way? Here's what you had to say about that. Yeah, lots of people. They weren't paying attention, putting out a vibe that they didn't want to be there, ignoring others, distracted, quiet, uninterested, distracted, bored, distant, uninterested. They wouldn't reach out and engage, monotone, distracted by cell phones. We actually have a picture of that guy. This is what he looks like. How many of you have seen that guy? How many of you have been that guy? I have. We all have. Sometimes it's very difficult to be present all the time. And as we'll learn later, you don't always have to be present. Sometimes it's as important to know when to be present as to know how to be present. The last question we asked was, what exactly is presence? And this is what you had to say. Sharp, professional, savvy, commands respect and attention in a warm, non-threatening way. Ability to attract and retain other people's attention. Takes a moment to focus on what they're saying or doing. A life force whose aura fills the room. Those are really good. That last one, having an aura that fills the room, is going to be really hard to live up to. I have an admission to make. By the end of this session, you might not have an aura that can fill up any room, anywhere, anytime. And it turns out that that's okay. There are 3 homonyms of the word presence that are important to know. The first is that aura, that thing that fills the room. Now, it turns out this is a whole lot easier to do if you're very rich, very famous, very good-looking, or very funny. So all of you who are rich, famous, good-looking, and funny, you're excused. I can't really teach you very much. Except this, being rich, famous, good-looking, funny isn't quite enough. You see, if you try to teach an actor how to be present, to fill in a room full of their aura, sometimes they puff up and they just look ridiculous. What you want to do to teach somebody to have presence is to think of the other homonyms. The second one is present in this moment, not the future and not the past. All actors already know what the other person is going to say, so to teach an actor to be present in the scene is to teach them to listen as if for the first time, not to think about what they're going to say, not to think about what's already been said, but to be here. And the easiest way to do that is to think of the third homonym, which is present, like a gift you give someone, a gift of your attention. All the descriptions we heard from Pat and Michael were about the other person giving attention to somebody else, and that was one of the things that increased their presence. Let's get out of the world of abstract discussion of what presence is and focus on the skills that we need to do it. In order to do that, I need to take you back in time a little bit. You see, before I was a professor, before I was a fight director, before I was in the theater, I was in the Army. And the end of my Army career came the day I fell 5 stories off a building while rock climbing on active duty. Now, I was climbing without a rope because I used to be thinner and I used to be pretty good, but I wasn't quite as good as I thought I was. As I was climbing the rocks that I was holding on, I had my hand wedged, it came loose and I turned and I fell. And there's 5 stories of empty space. And I don't know if you've ever taken a step off a curb that you didn't know was there and you had that sort of jolty feeling. Well, I just want you to imagine that that feeling just keeps going. It's a horrible feeling, falling to your death. By the way, if you ever hear of me jumping off of something to commit suicide, find my killer. I was pushed. This is not a way to go. That sensation of falling is one of the worst feelings in the world. And the problem with falling to your death is it's not the distance you go, it's the speed you gather. And I could hear the wind whistling louder and louder in my ears. And I don't know about you, but I've always wondered how I was going to die. And at that moment I thought, oh, okay, mystery solved, this is it. And as I'm falling faster and faster, suddenly if you've ever been in a car accident and you just have this massive impact, you can't describe it until afterwards. You're going and then something happens and then you feel, oh my goodness, what was that? So I was falling, this massive impact, and then I thought, I'm alive and I'm in a lot of pain. Now, I told you that story to tell you this story. My injuries after falling that distance were what were called open and comminuted, which means the bones in both of my legs and my arm exploded and burst out of the skin. which is actually worse than it sounds, believe it or not, because when the bones come out, they take arteries with them. And I was bleeding to death on the rocks, and I had some internal injuries. And somebody came and changed my life by saving my life. When that person came to get me, she looked down at me, and I could feel the blood loss. If you've ever gone to pass out, you feel the world just sort of shrinking around you. And so I was fading out of consciousness because I was bleeding to death. And suddenly, there was somebody right in my face, and she had grabbed me, and she was yelling. She said, "Hang in, stay with me." And I thought, oh, okay, fine, okay, all right. And then I'm fading in and out, and they're carrying me off the mountain. And she said, "We've called a helicopter to come get you, because if we don't get you there right away, you'll die." And I thought, I'm not sure you're supposed to tell me that, are you? Oh, okay. And then as we're walking, she was now standing right next to me, and she was holding my hand. And that handhold remains the most powerful conversation I ever had in my life. It told me, I know you're in pain. I know you're afraid. I am here with you. I will help you. Without saying a word, that silent communication was absolutely everything. But she was by my side. Then I started to fade out again, and they put me in the helicopter. And then she was kneeling by my side. And I just remember this haze. I kept thinking, she was here, and then she was here, and then she was here. And I just said, "Oh my goodness, you're everywhere." And she said, "I'm right where I need to be." Now this is the message that I've come to deliver to you. Be where you need to be. Presence is everything. You have to understand, that woman led me back to life. She was a leader in every sense of the term. Now, she didn't have a title, she didn't have any authority, but she had two important things. She had a shared goal, stay with me, stay alive, and communication about that goal. I'm here with you, I will help you get through this. Those two things, a clear goal and clear communication, are also what will give you presence anywhere, anytime. Now, the skill that she used was called proxemics. Sometimes she was in front of me, sometimes she was beside me, and sometimes she was at an angle to me. Let me explain what this means. Proxemics is the science of spatial relationships. In face-to-face encounters, it's very important to understand how your proximal relationship with others can magnify or undercut your presence. For instance, my daughter Zoe and I are currently seated in what's called the competitive relationship.
Hello.
The key to this relationship is that our eyes, shoulders, hips, and feet are pointed squarely in opposition to each other. You might recognize this position from images of people yelling at each other. This is where you would see two rival warlords negotiating over a peace treaty. There's something between us, and we can clearly see each other.
This is heavy.
Is it heavy? Ironically, you've probably also used the competitive relationship when you were at dinner with someone you loved. This is because you can clearly see them and give them your full attention. This is the position the EMT used when she needed me to focus my attention here. Her proximal relationship to me magnified that message. Zoe and I are now seated in what's called the cooperative position. The key to this position are that our eyes, shoulders, hips, and feet are pointed in parallel in the same direction. You'll note that our focus is on a shared goal rather than a relationship with each other. Now, this is a great place to sit if you're a salesman or a lawyer and you need to get someone to sign the deal. Okay, you want to sign here?
No.
Really?
I love you, Daddy.
I love you too. Really?
Yes.
Okay. Note that in this image, it's hard to tell what the relationship is between the two people, but it's clear what their relationship is to the task. This is the position the EMT used when she was walking with me along the mountain, holding my hand. Her proximal relationship to me reinforced the message that she was literally on my side. Zoe and I are now seated in what's called the corner position. The key to this position is that our eyes, hips, shoulders, and feet are pointed in an interlocking focus. We have a shared goal, but we are also in a relationship with each other. This is why it's sometimes also called the rapport-building position, because it allows for easy eye contact, but without the intensity of the competitive position. How does this feel?
Good. I love you, Daddy.
Oh, I love you too. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, it was fun.
This is the position you stand in when you talk with your friends. Even when two friends disagree, they rarely square off into a fully competitive posture. This is the position the EMT used when she was trying to connect with me and reassure me just before the helicopter took off.
Mushrooms.
Mushrooms?
Yeah, mushrooms.
We're going to have some outtakes from this. Now, the woman who led me back to life wasn't rich, good-looking, or famous. She didn't have any titles. All she had were a shared goal, stay with me, and clear communication. She used the tools of proxemics in order to help that communication take place. Sometimes she was right in front of me when she needed me to fight, the competitive position. Sometimes she was in the cooperative position in order to get me to go with her. Sometimes she was in the rapport-building position in order to make sure that we felt a connection and she knew that she was there with me. Now, the thing about this online environment is that a lot of the things that she did aren't available to us. For instance, that handhold that she had that was so powerful for me, you can't do over the internet. The ability to stand side by side with somebody is not a thing that you can do over the internet. However, there are some things that this medium lets you do even better, especially eye contact. A lot of the things about proxemics have to do with where your eyes are. Now, you'll notice that right now it looks like I'm talking directly to you. It's because I'm talking directly into the camera. So it's not a big conversation where I'm talking to a room. This is actually a personal medium. One of the things that the internet does very well is it allows interpersonal communication on a one-to-one basis. But the trick is you have to use the camera. So that if you have a screen sharing or you're talking to people on a Zoom call, their faces are down here. But look what happens to my eyes when I'm looking at the eyes of the people down here. I'm not actually making eye contact with them. In order to make eye contact with them, I have to look at the camera. I have to look up at the lens. This is a very simple, very easy way to have eye contact over the internet. But you can't always do it. You can't just talk to the camera the whole time. Sometimes you need to look down, and that's fine. This goes back to the idea that sometimes it's important to know when to do certain things. Let me tell you a little story that will explain a little bit more about what I mean. 2 years ago, I forgot my wedding anniversary. Now, at the very last minute, I remembered, and I tried very hard to get us dinner reservations someplace. The only place that I could get us dinner reservations were at Outback Steakhouse, which is, fine, but not great. Now, I'm telling you this because there's a very important point. What I want to do is take you on a journey of my wife's enjoyment of our dinner date. So for instance, if I put this on a graph, this is my wife's enjoyment over the course of the time. It's awesome, okay, awful, and as time goes on. So when she first realized that we were at Outback Steakhouse, her happiness was, okay, I don't know what this is. And then she realized that I had forgotten our wedding anniversary. And she said, "You forgot our anniversary, didn't you?" And I said, no, honey, I didn't. I was thinking about our second date. Do you remember our second date when we went and got steak? And her happiness went up because, in fact, she didn't remember about our second date. We've been married 25 years. Nobody remembers our second date, but she believed me. And so she thought maybe this was a special moment. Now, things were going great. We're having steak. And then in the table behind us, there was this little voice, and the kid said, "Mommy, I don't feel so good." And then he threw up. And her happiness went down severely. And I thought, oh, okay, this is not good. I have to turn this around. And so I turned on my charm and I said, think about our kids. We have such great kids. And her happiness went up a little bit. And then I turned on all my charm. I let out all the stops and I just did everything you could possibly do to be charming. And her happiness went, nothing. There's really no coming back from that. Anyway, this is the chart of my wife's happiness that evening. Now, the important thing is, the next day when her friend called her and said, "How was your anniversary?" Did she say it was awesome or did she say it was awful? What she said was, meh. She actually said meh. She was like, he forgot our anniversary, but I love him. What are you going to do? Okay, tell you that story to tell you this story. Last year, I was convinced that I was not going to make that mistake again. So I got us reservations at a place called the Boathouse, which isn't really that fancy, except it has some romantic memories for us. So when we first went there, her happiness is very good. She goes, this is all right. And then I turned on all the charm again. I had been taking dancing lessons. And I said, would you like to dance? And her happiness went down because she was like, who are you? What's going on? Are you having an affair? And I was like, no, I'm not having an affair. I'm doing my best to try to make up for last year because I love you very much. Okay, and so her happiness goes up. She believes me, kind of. And as the night goes on, I keep trying to make sure everything's okay. I'm looking around to make sure there are no kids. And then finally, the end of the evening comes and I think, I've got this. Now, at this point in our story, versions vary depending on who you're talking to. If you were inside my head that moment, you would see the check come. The waitress come and give the check. She would hand you the check, and as she walked away, you would scratch your head because you had an itch, and then you would look back. Now, if you had been in my wife's head, you would have seen what was apparently a very attractive woman come up and hand you the check, watch your husband go. As she walked away, and my wife said, were you looking at her butt? What was that all about? And I thought, no, I wasn't looking at her butt. Oh my God. And I'm thinking, okay, I can see this evening going bad again. So I thought, I need to turn this around. And one more time, opinions differ based on who you're listening to. So if you had been inside my head, you would have heard that little voice say, do something clever, man. Say something funny to turn this around. Yeah, I know you already know that this doesn't go well. If you had been inside my wife's head, you would have heard your husband say, oh my God, you sound like your mother. All right, I hear your judgment. I'm not telling you this because I'm proud of it. I'm telling you that this is just what happened. So her happiness goes like this. At the end of the night, we may or may not have had more of a disagreement. You were looking at her butt, I wasn't looking at her butt. Anyway, this is the dinner. But the next day, when her friend called her, said, how was your dinner? Did she say it was awesome? Come on, some of you, it was awesome? None of you? Okay, did they say it was okay? No, she didn't even say it was awful. She said it was the worst. It was the worst anniversary she'd ever had. Now, you think I made these slides for you, but I did not. I made these slides for my wife to explain to her how her rating of her happiness was wrong during the second anniversary. Now, here's a quick tip. Don't ever make slides to convince your wife that she's wrong. This is free advice. Just trust me on this. Now, they're good slides. They're very good slides. They're clear, they're concise. They didn't work. But the point remains. An economist would point out that during the second anniversary, her overall happiness, her overall enjoyment was actually twice what it was the year before. And yet, she rated them severely differently. Why was this? It's because of these moments. These remembered moments, these anchor points. The beginning of the evening, did you go to Outback Steakhouse or did you go to the boathouse where you have romantic memories? Did the kid throw up? Did your husband learn to dance? At the end of the evening, was it okay and he told you he loved you, or did you fight and he said, you're just like your mother? Those anchor points in medicine are what we call empathy moments. Empathy moments are the moments that matter. They're moments when something changes in the conversation. And this is what's most important. Now here's the secret for presence. Some moments are more important than others. Being at your daughter's wedding, being at your own wedding, being there when your friend needs you. These moments are absolutely essential. Other moments blur into the background sometimes, but at key moments you need to be present. Now, here's a little trick we do with doctors, because you can also make the moment matter. You don't necessarily have to be at the mercy of whatever is going on around you. You can turn any moment into a special moment. So for instance, who here has a business card? Now, if your cell number, your contact information is on that card and you hand that card to someone, they're getting the same information as everyone else. But imagine what would happen if you didn't have that information on it. When you handed that card to somebody, you said, wait a minute, and you turned it over and you said, here's my cell number, here's my email. If you need to get in touch with me, here's how you do it. Now what you've done is you've given them the same information, but you've made it happen in a way that seemed like, because it was, a conversation with that person, a gift for that person. You can make many moments matter in order to increase your presence. Now, there's a dark side to this as well. Some moments are so important that you can't get anything wrong. In addition to working in business, I also work in healthcare, and I teach doctors how to break bad news to patients. And one of my surgeon friends has an awful joke. Have you ever been in a waiting room when somebody was having surgery and you sat there and every doctor who walked through the door, what were you thinking? You were thinking, is that them? Are they coming to bring me news? My surgeon friend said, you know what the worst joke you could play on somebody is? When you come through that door and you see everyone looking at you, you can make eye contact with someone and go, oh, wrong person, sorry. Now, the reason that's kind of funny and really wrong is because in one moment, you could crush somebody's life by not saying anything, just by making eye contact with them, breathing in and out, and then starting towards them. Here's the thing, because some moments matter more than others, when people are afraid, they tend to read into a situation with their fear. Any time they are at a lack of information, they will fill in the blanks with their fears. When we teach doctors how to break bad news to patients, we have to make sure that we use special ways to keep track of all the moments that matter. Now, here's a little story. I've been teaching doctors how to break bad news for a number of years. And I was doing this originally with Dr. Lori Lickholm, who is a palliative care physician, one of the best I've ever seen. If you don't know what palliative care is, that's the end of medicine. They can't make you better, but they can make you comfortable. There's a thing called transitions to palliative care, which are conversations about the worst things imaginable. And Dr. Lickholm asked me if I would have these conversations with her. And from theater, what you learn is to say yes. So I said, of course. And so over the years, I learned how to do this. But one day, she asked me if I could have that conversation by myself, because she couldn't be there. And I said yes. And I walked in a room, and there were 50 doctors there. And they were all looking at me. Now, I don't know if you've ever felt like a fraud before, but this is what I felt like when I walked in that room. In order to know what was going on, in order to break the ice, I said, I know you have to break bad news to patients a lot. How often do you have to do it? And one of the doctors in the front row raised her hand, and she said she'd had to do it 5 times that morning. Now, this was 9:30 in the morning. By 9:30 a.m., that doctor had to tell 5 families that their lives were never going to get better. And this is when feeling like a fraud really hit me, because I've never told anyone that they were going to die before. And if I do tell you, totally go get a second opinion, because I have no idea what I'm talking about. But those doctors weren't asking me about the medicine. They understood the medicine. They were asking me about the human interaction. What happens if they cry? What happens if I cry? Where do I look? What do I do with my hands? Can I hold their hand? These were the questions that they were asking, and these were the conversations that we had. And it lasted for about an hour. And I told them everything that I knew about how human interaction works, a lot of the things that we're talking about now, and also the next skills that I'm about to give you about how to break bad news. And later that day, and I'll never forget it, it was like a scene from an Oprah movie. That doctor, I was still in the hospital, and she came running down the hallway. And she said, Dr. Anderson, I want you to know that I had 5 more conversations later on that day, and that they were fundamentally better. Now, she didn't mean that the patients were getting better. Those patients were never getting better. What she meant was that those conversations were easier, were more soothing for the patient, were clearer, and accomplished the goal more. Now, I was an actor. I was a fine actor. And the reason that at least I thought I was, the reason you go into the arts is because you think, if I do this right, something in me will touch something in the other people, and their lives will be somehow transformed for the better. In all my years of acting, I never had this much impact. In this one moment, in 1 hour of working, I was able to fundamentally change the lives of 5 families on the worst day of their life. And every other patient that doctor will talk to, and every other patient that every other doctor in that room will talk to. Now, this wasn't about me. This was about these skills that I'm about to share with you. The thing you need to know about bad news conversations is that they're structurally no different than other conversations, except that the stakes are so high that any mistake could be catastrophic. So in order to keep track of all the moments that matter, we use this acronym to help us remember what to do. Here it is. This is pre-spikes. Pre is the moment before. It's recognizing when you're about to have a difficult conversation to be mentally prepared and not bring other things in the room with you, to have a way in and a way out. S is setting. It's what we've already talked about. It's proxemics. It's having a conversation in a room that's appropriate and not in a hallway. P is perception. This is the most important part, and we're about to talk about it. I is immediate concerns. That's paying attention to thirst or fear or hunger or pain or anything that the patient is dealing with that will get in the way of the rest of the conversation. K is knowledge. Clear, concise, and unambiguous. In the United States and European countries, you use the word death, you use the word cancer. This isn't true in some other parts of the world. E is empathy. Empathy is recognizing that the other person is going to have an emotional response and not to let that get in the way, to allow emotions to happen, to name them and respect them and understand them, and not to try to stop them. And S is second touch. That's recognizing that no conversation of this magnitude can be done in a single setting, to make sure that this is part of an ongoing conversation. Now, what I want to focus on, and the key to this is P, perception. Perception is the key to all of it. That is to ask before you tell. That is to be interested and not interesting. Let me explain what I mean by this. Imagine two different patients, and I've seen this happen. The result is the same. It's a positive HIV test. That is, you're talking to a patient about the fact that they do in fact have the HIV virus. Now, one patient, you ask, what's your understanding of the HIV virus? And that patient says, well, that's that AIDS thing. Only homosexuals and drug users get that, and I'm not a homosexual or a drug user. What are you saying? Okay, that conversation is going to go one way. There's going to be a lot of explanation. There's going to be a lot of education. You're going to have to use words that are not jargony. Same fact, positive HIV test. And you ask, different patient, what's your understanding of the HIV virus? And that patient says, my partner's been HIV positive for 10 years, and I'm afraid I am as well. Now, these are the same facts, but two entirely different conversations. That conversation, you can use jargon. That person already has a number of immediate concerns and cares that you can address right away. Those are two entirely different conversations, and you won't know what conversation you're in until you ask. Now, this isn't just about bad news conversations. Perception is also true and also key to any conversation you have about anything that has any emotional content. Let me explain what I mean by this. My oldest child knows exactly where he was the moment his childhood ended. Let me explain what I mean by this. He came home one day from school and said, Mommy, are you and Daddy really Santa Claus? And my wife swore that she would always tell our children the truth. And so she said, that's right, honey. Mommy and Daddy are really Santa Claus. And he went, what? And he burst into tears and he ran into his room and he stayed in his room, no lie, for 3 days crying. Okay, now don't judge my wife too harshly. As I said, she has to put up with a lot. She swore that she would always tell the truth. But I want you to imagine that that conversation had gone the way it would now if she had had the training that you now have. If she had asked before she had told, it would have gone like this. Mommy, are you and Daddy really Santa Claus? And she'd have said, well, what do you think, honey? And he would have said, well, some boys at school were saying that, but I don't believe them because I'm young and innocent and I want my innocence to continue and I want there to be light and magic and goodness in the world. And she'd have said, I want that too. Here's a cookie. And he said, I love you, Mommy. I love you, Daddy. And everything would have been great. But it wasn't because she didn't ask before she told. I promise you, I know this seems kind of strange, but it is absolutely essential. Any conversation you have that has any emotional content, be interested, don't be interesting. Find out as much as you can about the other person and about their perspectives. What do you think about this? What do you already know? That will tell you the rest of the way that these conversations need to go. Asking before you tell is one of the keys to being present. let's quickly think about the things that we've learned so far. 3 skills. Don't be interesting, be interested. Ask before you tell. Learn as much as you can about the other person before telling them all the clever things about your life. Pay attention to where you are physically, about your proxemics. Be where you need to be, and use eye contact even in key moments over the internet. 3, make the moment matter. Make sure that you understand that some moments are more important than others. Pay attention to those key moments that happen, and also try to make moments happen that matter to the other person whenever you can. Now, here's a bonus skill I want to give you. The last S in pre-spikes is second touch. And this is very important because it means that no one conversation needs to be all things to all people. It's the little things that often matter. For instance, here's a text a friend sent me 2 weeks ago. Now, what had happened is they had twins, young infant twins, and his wife was walking down the stairs holding them, and she slipped. And one of the twins, his name was Grant, he hit his head on the steps as she fell. And he started to throw up, and she took him to the doctor. And then the doctor said, well, he probably just has the flu. And this is in the world of COVID. She sent him back home, and she's worried. And then later that day, he started throwing up blood, and she brought him back to the doctor. And the doctor gave him some anti-nausea medication and sent him home again. The next morning, Grant was pale. She took him back into a better hospital, to my hospital, and he said, why has the child not had a CT scan yet? He gave him a CAT scan and found out that Grant had been bleeding into his brain. Now, Grant is fine. Grant is absolutely fine. But in this moment, they were both very afraid, and they were enmeshed in a hospital system that had betrayed them twice. Not this hospital, but the overall system. I happened to be in the hospital because that's where I work. And I said, can I stop by and get you anything? And he said, no, you can't come back here because they only let family. And I said, let that be my problem. And I got back there because, I don't know if you know this, but you can go anywhere if you pretend you know what you're doing. And so I went back and was socially distant. And all I did was communicate doctor. I translated doctor into English for them. And I was just there to help reassure them. Now, what did that cost me? It cost me nothing. I was in the hospital anyway. It cost me 15 minutes of my time. But what did that moment mean for my friend and his wife? To know that somebody was there for them, just even for a second. It costs you nothing. Here's the thing about being present. It costs you nothing, but it can mean everything to the other people. This is the last skill. It costs you nothing, but can mean everything. Give whenever you can, and let the moments be as small as they have to be. Little tiny moments. You can just turn them on anytime. Now, there is one more thing. The discussion I had with Michael was, there was a great story he told, and I want to leave you with this because it's another way that you can practice your presence anytime, anywhere. This is what Michael had to say.
When I was much younger, I was painfully shy. And people today tend to accuse me of being an extrovert, which I'm not. I'm still painfully shy. But I learned a neat thing along the way. I had a college professor who told me being shy was a sign of my considering myself superior to others.
Oh, wow.
And that so distressed me that I decided I was going to overcome it. And the way I overcame it was I would put myself in a situation that was usually a crowd, typically of people I didn't know, and I would look for the person who looked most uncomfortable in the room.
Ah.
And I would make it my job to make them comfortable, to bring them out, and then to start introducing them to other people. So it wasn't about me.
It was about them.
Yes.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. God, that's a great story. I am totally sharing that story.
Okay.
All right. So here are all the skills that we've learned so far. I promised you 3. I gave you 5. Don't be interesting. Be interested. Be where you need to be. Use proxemics. Pay attention to eye contact, even in the virtual world. Make the moment matter. Find out when you can make it clear to other people that they are important to you. Make little moments matter. It costs you nothing and it can mean everything. You don't have to spend a lot of time with this. And finally, practice helping others as often as you can. This is a skill that the more you practice, the better you get at it. Okay, we're about to leave this recorded world and step into the world where we can talk to each other. I look forward to seeing you. Let me leave you with one more version, one more clip of the fire whip, because it's really cool. That's really the only reason. I'll see you in a minute.